Hey everybody, Johnny here. In this video, we're going to take a look at a new add-on that I've just released in collaboration with Jonathan over at Makertales. He's got a lot of amazing Blender content, especially if you're into precision modeling, as well as a whole bunch of other Maker-related content. He and I have put together Measurable as a way to be able to add measurements to your drawings in a customizable way, but that isn't overly complicated. This is the first version, and we want to get it out into your hands so that we can get the feedback we need to make this into an even better product. If you want to grab Measurable, there's a link in the description to the Gumroad page where you can pick it up for just $3. If you find that you really love Measurable and you want to support its development even more, we have a recommended donation of $8 instead. But in this video, we're going to take a look at how you would create a drawing like the one here. So let's jump right into it. So to get started, we're going to be adding measurements to this part. There's a few pieces of setup we want to do first in order to make this go as easy as possible. First, we want to be working in the correct unit scale. For this particular project, I've chosen 0.01 as my unit scale. So that means that one Blender unit is equal to 10 millimeters. I would suggest playing around with your unit scale and see how it affects various projects that you're working on. Once you've got your object to scale, and your unit scale is set where you want it, then make sure you apply scale and rotation to your object. You can do that simply by pressing Ctrl A and choosing rotation and scale. You'll know your scale and rotation are set correctly when under your item tab, your rotation is all 0 and your scale is all 1. This is going to help your measurements show up correctly. Once you've done that, you're ready to add a measurement container to your object. To do that, have your object selected and then choose the Add Measurement Container to Selected button. This will create a bounding box around your object, which is the new object that will house your measurements. By default, the container name is shown, but you can turn that off by unchecking this box. Any measurements you add to this container will show up in this list, where it says Current Measurements. Now let's go ahead and add a few. The main measurements you're going to use are in the Standalone Measurements panel, the first being the length between 2 points, which is called ToObjectsLength. It's called ToObjectsLength because you'll choose 2 points, and 2 empties will be created as your anchor points for your measurement. Let's measure the side of this object. I'll go into Edit mode and choose the 2 endpoints of my measurement. I'm going to choose this point and this point. Once I have that selected, I can leave Edit mode, and with my part as the inactive selection, and my container as the active selection, I'll click ToObjectsLength. Now you can see that this has been added, and under Current Measurements, it's been added here. If I want to rename this, I can. From this panel, I can hide a measurement in the viewport. I can hide it in the renders. If I click this button, all of the empties that are associated with this measurement will be selected. And then finally, I can delete the measurement if I want. The settings for measurements are broken into 2 panels, Shared and Individual. Shared settings are the settings that exist on most of the measurements that you would want to show up the same across many different measurements. Things like the text size or thickness, the line thickness, the arrow sizes, and things like that. The individual settings are those that are going to make the most sense to have different for each measurement. For instance, I want this measurement to stick out the side here, so I'm going to need it to rotate around the edge I had selected. So down here in the individual settings, I'm going to choose Rotation Around Edge. Now by default, you see that the text is pointing up, but I want it to face forward as I'm looking at this object. So I'll go into my camera view and line up my camera with the object. And then, under my shared settings, I'll choose a camera. Once I've done this, any text now that's in this measurement container will point towards this camera. And if I rotate the camera, you'll see that the text stays aligned with the camera at all times. Some other settings under the shared settings are things like the text size, the text thickness, the number of decimals that will show up in my measurements, the units that I want to show for my measurements, my line thickness, my arrow size, the arrow shape, and the arrow resolution. If I were to render this now, and I zoom in on my measurement, you'll see that it's a 3D object. However, when I render this, I want this to show up as if it's text printed on top of the image. So for that, I'm going to need a material that isn't affected by my scene's light at all. So the material would be what you would call a shadeless material. You can create one of these by choosing a color here at the top of the shared measurement settings and clicking Create Overlay Material. Now, if I go down to my text material, you'll see a black overlay material. And when I click that, it gets applied to all the text objects in this container. I'll do the same for the line material. Now, if I zoom in on my measurement, you see that it shows up in a solid black color with no shading, so you can't tell that this is a 3D object. If I don't want to use the built-in Blender font, I can also select a new one. If I already have a font loaded, I can select it from the list, or I can choose the Load New Font and Set button. I'll go to my Fonts folder and choose something else. And you can always switch back if you prefer. Now, because I want this to be a technical drawing, I want to get rid of the perspective. So I'll go into my camera and change it from a perspective camera to an orthographic camera, and then change the orthographic scale to zoom out a bit. Now that we've added our first measurement, let's go ahead and add another type. Let's add in an angle measurement in this corner. To do that, I'll go into Edit mode and select the vertex that will represent my corner. I'll choose this one. Now going back and selecting my container, I'll choose Angle Measurement. I'm going to hide my camera for a moment just to get it out of the way. Now, when you add an angle measurement, it's going to add in these 2 points at a small distance. That's just to get them out of the way a little bit so that you can work with them. These 2 empties that are created help determine the direction that each arm of this angle measurement will go. I'll bring this one down here and this one over here. Now, we do want to lock these in to be a bit more precise. So I want to go ahead and turn on vertex snapping so that I can snap these empties to vertices that are on my mesh. You can do that by turning on snapping and changing the mode to vertex, or under the Setup and Tools menu, there's a toggle vertex snapping button, and that'll do that in one step for you. Once this is enabled, you can grab these empties and snap them to your object. Now you'll notice that this measurement is really far out, and we're going to want to bring it in. So we'll go ahead and select our container and choose our angle measurement. I'll open up my Properties panels, and down under my individual settings, I'll lower the text distance from center, and also the extension line length. If you need to adjust the beginning and the ends of the extension lines, you can use the extension 1 and 2 trim, start, and end. This gives you individual control over where each of these begin and end. You also have control over the gap that's in the middle of the arrows, and also how far the line is away from the arrows. If you want to measure the other side of an angle instead of the smaller side, you can move the lines to the other side, and then use the text position tweak to put the measurement in the middle. This works well for a small angle where you want the measurement on the inside, but the lines on the outside. Or you could say, show the larger angle. And there you would have 270 here. And you could do something like that. Next, let's add 2 different styles of diameter measurements. The first one we'll add to this circle. To create a circle measurement, whether it's a radius or a diameter, you go into Edit mode, you simply select 3 vertices that lie on the circumference of the circle that defines the curve you're trying to measure. Then, Going to our container, we choose the type of measurement we want. In this case, we're going to do an internal diameter measurement. I can use the dimension length to push this out a bit. And these measurements create two empties. One is the center of the circle that you're measuring, and the other one sits on the circumference. So I could snap this to any of the points along this circle, and it's going to give me a nice measurement. Now let's do the same thing for an external diameter. We'll do this circle. I'll choose my 3 points, select my container, and choose external diameter. The same sort of thing goes on. If I wanted these measurements pointing in the other direction, I could grab their empties and bring them over like this. But now, if I wanted the text to be on the other side of this arrow, in my measurement settings, there's a text on right option. I can simply flip that to the other side. Let's add a radius measurement to this corner. I add this just like I would add a circle measurement. I'll grab 3 points on this curve, go to my container, and since this is a convex shape that I want to measure, I'm going to choose convex radius. This has created a center point for this radius right here. Now I do see in measuring this one that my units really aren't working out well for me at this point. So I'm going to go back to my shared properties and change this back to millimeter. And for our last radius, we're going to do a concave radius, like this one here. This is the same as all of the others. We'll grab our 3 points, select our container, and choose concave radius. Some other options you have are things like adding a center point. For the center point, you simply select an empty and your container and choose center point. You can come down and change the radius, and you can change these dash settings. If you've used a program like Illustrator before, you may be familiar with this dash gap setup, but there are several preset line types that you can choose here. So if I press dashed and then lower my dash unit length, you'll see that I get a dashed line. In a similar way, we have a construction line. We can create a construction line by simply selecting 2 empties, our container, and then clicking construction line. And we have the same dash settings here as well. For now, I'm going to remove those 2, just to keep our drawing clean. For this video, we're going to skip over the 2 vertex length and edge length options. Those are just 2 ways of measuring length like we did with our first measurement. I'll cover those in a different video. But we do want to take a look at face area. If you have a face, like this one, and you want to indicate the area of this face, simply select the face in edit mode, go to our container, and click face area. An empty will be created in the center of that face. If you grab it and pull out, you'll see that you get a call-out line pointing to that face. This measurement is actually connected to the index of this face. So if you alter your mesh in such a way that your face indexes change, this will alter this measurement and you may have to re-add it. Another type of callout you might want to add is a text callout. To add a text callout, simply add an empty where you want the target of your callout to be. Let's say right here. Now with this selected, we go to our container and choose text callout. Now, you may notice all of these little dotted lines that are being created to the center of our object. These are all the relationship lines between our container object and these empties that are being created. If those get in the way, you can simply go up here to your overlays panel and turn off relationship lines. Back to our text callout, we can set the text here in the text settings. One issue currently with the way Blender inputs text is that you can't enter multiple lines in one of these boxes. So if you want to have multiple lines with your text callout, you'll have to use the escape character for new line, which is a \n character. You can also use the tab character, which is \t. From here, you have a lot of text options that you can change, like the character spacing, the word spacing, the line spacing, and a text box width, which we'll look at in a minute. You have some options here also for how you want this callout to look. Notably, you can change the start and the end trimming of this arrow, which is great if you want to do some sort of animation between your callout and the object. You can also change the dash settings on your callout line. And now, if you have a block of text that you want to add to your document, you can simply add an empty where you'd like it to be, choose your container, and click Text Block. Immediately, the empty that's your anchor will be selected so you can move it around. If we come down here to the text, I'm going to paste in a large block of text. Now, as you can see here, this isn't going to be real helpful. So we're going to need to have this show up a little nicer. This is where the text box width comes in. When this is set at 0, the text will all stay on one line unless you have a new line character. But as you increase the text box width, the text will start to flow once it gets to the end of that width. So you can lay it out how it looks best to you. You can also change the justification here, where 0 is left, 1 is center, and 2 is right. Now, if we wanted to change the font size of just this text block, but leave all our measurements the same, with what we've looked at so far, you can't do that. At the top of each of these measurement settings, there's an option called Do Not Share Settings. If I enable this, you'll see that the other settings that were in the shared measurement settings for this are now down here in our individual settings. So now you'll see we have text size and text thickness down here in our individual settings. So if I change the text size here, it's going to change it just for this one block. And if I were to change the text size for the rest of the document in the shared measurement settings, you'll see that that doesn't affect my text block. If later I wanted to resynchronize this with the shared settings, I would simply come back here, turn off Do Not Share Settings, and then click Resync Shared Settings. Once again, this one will be synchronized with the rest, and when we change any of the other shared settings, this one will change too. I'm going to unhide my camera and make sure this is framed up nicely. I'll turn off snapping and change my orthographic scale. Remember that when your camera is in orthographic mode, pulling it back and forward doesn't change the zoom like it does in perspective mode, so you have to use the orthographic scale. With this framed up, I'm going to go to my world settings and change my background color to white. I'll also make sure under my render properties that my film setting is not set to transparent. And then I'll give this a render. Now, just to make this look a little better, I do want to add some outlining to my object. So I'm going to choose my object, and then under my setup and tools, I'm going to click Add Line Style to Active Object. This will add a grease pencil object to your scene set with the line art modifier preloaded onto your object. If the lines it creates are too thick for you, you can simply go to the modifier panel of your line art object and change the line thickness. Let's render this and see how it looks. There's only one other thing we need to do to finish this part of the tutorial. And you might notice that only one of our objects has a different font. That's because currently in this release, fonts act a little differently than the other shared settings. So if we choose our container and go back down into our shared settings, we can simply click Set Selected Font, and that will set them on all the measurements. So do keep that in mind. If you use the tab character or the new line character, and you choose a font that doesn't render them properly, you may get a square like this. In that case, you will need to go into that particular measurement and remove that special character. And there you have a basic measurement drawing. In a future video, we're going to take a look at ways to take these measurements and bring them into the Blender compositor so that we can control how the measurements overlay the object in case we have some measurements that are showing up behind our object and we don't want them to. Also, we're going to take a look at ways to use the line styles in order to have hidden lines come out as dashed lines. So I hope this introduction to Measurable was helpful. Again, you can pick it up for $3 at the link below. And if you find Measurable to be really helpful for your work and you want to support its future development, we suggest that you add on a price of $8 instead. I want to thank Jonathan over at Makertales for this whole collaboration. It's been a lot of fun and I'm excited to see where we take it in the future. If you aren't familiar with Makertales, you definitely want to check out his channel. He's doing some really creative work that I bet you're going to love. If you want to give some ongoing support to this channel, my Patreon link is in the description. And speaking of Patreon, I want to give a shout out to my patrons. You all are amazing, and I appreciate your support more than you can know. So anyhow, I hope you find Measurable useful, and I hope it inspires you to make something awesome. And until next time, I'll catch you later.